and today's lecture is number 5, and the title of our lecture is Translation and Sacred Texts and the Quran. Now if we look as usual, by the end of this lecture you should be familiar with certain problems of sacred text translation, and you should be able to translate simple examples of sacred texts, not necessarily the Quran. No, I'm not talking about by the end of this lecture you would be able to translate the Quran. No, I'm not saying this, but I'm saying that you should be able to translate very simple sacred text, not necessarily the Quran, definitely not. Now let's talk first about sacred text. What do we mean by sacred text in terms of translation? Now, religious texts are known as scripture or scriptures or holy writings or holy books. These are the texts which are considered as religious and sacred. And why they are sacred? Because they are relevant and central to religious beliefs. Now, many religions and spiritual movements believe that their sacred texts are divinely and supernaturally revealed or inspired. Now examples of sacred and religious texts are like Islamic sacred texts. We have in Islam, we have the Quran, and we have the Hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Christianity sacred text is the Bible, New Testament. For the Judaism, sacred text is the Old Testament. As for other non-heavenly sacred texts, like Buddhism and Hinduism sacred texts, they have their own sacred texts. And what's special about these sacred texts is they tend to have some religious and canonical attachment to them. In other words, they are distinguished from any other type of text. Why? Because people look high at them. They have their own prestige in the minds of people. That's why they are considered as sacred and dear to people. So it is very important to understand that there is a distinction between religious or sacred texts and non-religious or non-sacred texts. But what concerns us here, what concerns us in this lecture, is the Quran as central text. So we will take the Quran as an example of our sacred text. Okay, now the Quran, from the legislative perspective, I'm sure you agree with me that without any shadow of doubt, that the Quran is the most authoritative source of the Islamic law, and it is the word of Allah revealed to Muhammad ﷺ through Angel Gabriel over a period of 23 years. I'm sure you know all this information, but it is good to really stress on this and to record it. And why I'm saying this? I'm saying this because it's very important for the translator to be aware of the fact that until now, no corruption of whatsoever kind has ever occurred to it, neither for its content nor for its form, and it has been guarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself, who sent it down to all mankind and who has undertaken it to keep it as pure and when it was revealed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, "Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikra wa inna lahu lahafizun." Now we have without doubt sent down the message, and we will assuredly guard it from corruption. Now, having said that, we are trying to pass this important message to any person who thinks of translating the Quran or the meanings of the Quran or the interpretations of the Quran into English, that he should know that the Quran is considered not only the absolute authority in Islam, but it is also viewed as the most sacred, most valuable, and most dear to Muslims. So this is very important. This is from the legislative perspective. Now, if we move to the other point, from a linguistic and stylistic perspective, the Quran, I mean, one of the prodigies of the Quran is its matchless discourse and rhetorical style. One of the miracles of the Quran is its discourse and its rhetorical style. In other words, I would say that the style of the Quran doesn't belong to any type of literary text or genre types, be it poetry, prose, drama, or any other narrative style, but it has its own miraculous and idiosyncratic style, which would make one feel that they are simultaneously in front of a multi types of texts, a narrative text on one occasion, a dramatic dialogue on another, and an impressive text on a different occasion. Nevertheless, the Quran is neither of them when it is looked at as one complete distinctive style that has its own eloquence, diction, intensity, and variety of expressions. In other words, the style of the Quran is like no other style, as it combines between miraculously expressive rhetoric and the discourse on the one hand, and the prodigies past and the unseen future events, for each of which there is evidence in the Quran on the other hand. And this is what makes the Quranic text a potential trap for translators to fall in. Now, I don't have to add anything else to what I've said now. Go through it and see. And this is one of the most problematic issues that translators face when they think of translating the meanings or the interpretations of the Quran. Now, if we come to the translation of the Quran, I would like to say that this is a long lecture, but I would like just to say few things about the translation of the Quran. Now, since the revelation of the Quran in 1612 AD, and scholars from different fields have been trying to solve the controversy of translatability of the Quran. Some scholars say, yes, we can translate the meanings and the interpretations of the Quran into English, and some people say, no, we cannot translate it. It's a dilemma, you know, and I would leave it to you by the end of this lecture to decide whether really the interpretations or the meanings of the Quran could be translated in the way it is translated nowadays. And I'm sure you must have seen some of the translations of the Quran. The Quran has been translated into many languages: Turkish, Urdu, French, German, and Persian, and English, and many others. It has been translated by people or scholars of different languages, of different religions, and different linguistic, cultural, social, and ideological and theological backgrounds. So you need to really take this into account. Of course, they must be competent in Arabic, but you know, if we analyze the samples I have given you as examples here, we will realize that although they are competent in Arabic, but still they seem to have lacked the ability not only to have the feel of the Quranic word, but also to recognize the linguistic and cultural dimensions of it. And we will find out by, going through this. What I have done, and I have to investigate whether the Quran can be translated or not. I have selected five samples of the Quran's translations. What I have done, I have selected excerpts from different English versions of the Quran. Now the versions I have selected is number one, as you can see, Dawood, 1974. He was an Arab Jew, an Iraqi Arab Jew. Arbery, an English Christian. And Ali Abdullah Yusuf Ali, he was an Indian Muslim. And then King Fahd Quran printed complex version of Ali's, 1989. It's a modified or amended copy of Ali's. And then the recent one, Yuskul, a Turkish Muslim. Now the examples, I have selected examples from each one of them, the same examples, by the way, exactly the same, and try to analyze them and compare between these versions of the same excerpt. I've chosen one example, and I have put it here for you to decide whether they have agreed on the same translation or not, and the kind of problems they have caused in mistranslating the concept. Now, before we go any further, I'm sure you know what we mean by translation. I mean, translation is the transferring, the transfer of a piece of writing, whether it is spoken or written from one language into another, taking into account its linguistic and cultural, social, what we say, spiritual, religious connotations. I mean, it's the package you need to bear in mind when you are translating from Arabic into English or from English into Arabic, and you need to give more. You need to make more effort when you are translating religious text. Now, translatable subject matter. There are three types: translatable subject matter, like scientific and technical texts, and then we have translatable subject matter, but with a great loss. This involves the translation of prose, poetry, and some documents, and But the most untranslatable subject matter. This involves textual material, which through the process of translation loses over 90% of its originality, and the English version of the Quran is taken as an example. Of this type. So the Quran's translation comes under the category of untranslatable subject matter. Why? Because about 90% loss takes place when you are translating it from Arabic into English, whether you are translating the interpretation or the meanings. Now the translatability of the Quran from a linguistic point of view. Now, if you look at this example, let's look at this example: A, B, C, D, E, and the following excerpt has been chosen as an example for discussion. الزانية والزاني فاجلدوا كل واحد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الزانية والزاني فاجلدوا كل واحد منهما 100 جلدة ولا تأخذكم بهما رأفة. Surah An-Nur. Now look at Dawood, how he translated it: the adulterer and the adulteress. Then shall each be given 100 lashes. Arbery, the fornicatress and fornicator, scourge each one of them 100 stripes. The women and the man guilty of adultery or fornication, flog each of them with 100 stripes. Ali. The women and the man guilty of fornication, flog each of them 100 stripes. King Fahd Complex, Ali's revised edition. Now, then you have Yuskil, the adulteress and adulterer, you shall lash each of them. Now, looking at this example, number one, Dawood, Dawood, for instance, put the word الزانية, الزاني قبل الزانية, and changing the word order really violates violates the message of the in the Quran. The Quran says الزانية والزاني. It should be really kept as الزانية والزاني, because it changes the meaning of. It is the only place, by the way, in the Quran that the female is mentioned before the male. It is to add that it is the woman who is responsible when an illegal sexual intercourse takes place, whether before or after marriage. If the sexual intercourse took place without the prior consent of the women, then the whole act would not be called an adultery or fornication, but rather rape. So in this case, Dawood has violated the word order in Arabic and consequently affected the meaning of the ayah, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you need to be aware of this linguistic aspect of the Quran. Again, the word, some people they used lash, some of them used scourge, and some of them used flog. Now look at the lash. Lash has weak connotation. Scourge, strong connotation. Flog, mild connotation. The meaning in the Quran really combines the semantic connotation of the Arabic verb. May have a combination of the three of them. Fajlidu. It has the meaning of all of them. So in this case, it's not easy really to translate the Quran or the meaning of the Quran, from the linguistic perspective, as some people would think. So you can see that 5 translations have different translations, and this difference, unfortunately, has affected the meaning and the interpretation of the Quran. Therefore, I don't think it is translatable in any means, by any means. So this is one of the mistakes they make. Now we look at the translation of the Quran from the cultural point of view. Again, we say, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا إِنَّهُ كَانَ فَاحِشَةً وَسَاءَ سَبِيلًا. Now Dawood, you shall not commit adultery. Arbery, and approach not fornication. Ali, nor come near to adultery. Ali's revised, nor come near to adultery. Yuskil, do not go near adultery. Now you can tell that the word adultery is used 1, 2, 3, 4, except Arbery, he used fornication. Now if you, in English for instance, the 5 versions clearly violate the Islamic concept of adultery. Their translation of the concept of az-zina in English is not correct. Now, why? Because Dawood's and Yuskil and Ali's versions would mean to an English reader that it is prohibited to practice illegal sex only after marriage, whereas Arbery's version would mean that it is prohibited to practice illegal sex only before marriage. According to Western culture, it is socially and culturally acceptable to practice sex before marriage only, not after marriage. It seems that their English version have given a much distorted picture of the Islamic principle, which considers any illegal sexual intercourse, whether before or after marriage, is strictly prohibited in Islam. You see, this is a very, very serious issue. Now, all the translations seems to have misunderstood the concept of zina in Islam. So you need to be aware of these concepts, and the cultural dimensions of these concepts in Arabic and in our religion need to be really tackled very carefully, so that you do not distort the meanings and the message of Islam. So this is a very serious problem. We can see in the translation of these 5 versions, as you can see. If we look at the translation of the Quran from a psychological point of view, now when you are translating أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فإذا جاءت الصاخة يوم يفر المرء من أخيه وأمه وأبيه وصاحبته وبنيه. Now لكل امرئ منهم يومئذ شأن يغنيه. Surah Abas. صدق الله العظيم. Now look at these translations and see how they have translated it in a very, very different way, in very different ways. And I mean, Dawood, he says his wife and his children. Now Arbri, he said وَصَاحِبَتِهِ وَبَنِيهِ, his consort and his sons. Ali said his wife and his children. And Ali's revised his wife and children. And look, Yüksel translated his mate and the children. Now, I would agree only with his wife and his children. Now, his consort, his mate could be anything. His mate, it's not acceptable at all. It's wrong to say his mate and the children, because mate could be a man and it could be a woman. You know, so unfortunately, even Yüksel has made a very serious mistake in his translation of وَصَاحِبَتِهِ وَبَنِيهِ. You know, in addition to that, I mean, if you read the English translation, you don't have this psychological effect on you, and this impact on you when you read فَإِذَا جَاءَتُ الصَّاخَّةُ. You can feel it, you know. So this is one of the problems translators encounter when they are translating the meanings, not the word. You cannot, it's untranslatable, the word of the Quran, but I'm talking about the meanings and the interpretations. I mean, he misunderstood the meaning of وَصَاحِبَتِهِ وَبَنِيهِ, you know. So I have already commented on this. This can be seen through the wrongly chosen word for وَصَاحِبَتِهِ وَبَنِيهِ. Think about it and see, you know, the seriousness of translating a sacred text like the Quran, like that of the Quran. Now, if you look at the Quran from the rhythmic point of view, can you achieve the rhythmicness or the rhymingness that the Arabic word carries with it? When you read Arabic, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم سأصليه سقر وما أدراك ما سقر لا تبقي ولا تذر لواحة للبشر عليها 19 سورة المدثر. Now the way I am not claiming that I am reading it really wonderfully, but anybody who would read the Quran, you know, I mean, he feels the rhythmicness, the rhymingness of the Quran, of the word of the Quran. Now, all of them seems to have failed in, you know, giving such impact and such feel of the Quranic word. So, from our discussion, I mean, I'm sure you agree with me that without any doubt, we can conclude that the Quran is definitely untranslatable due to the linguistic sophistication of the Arabic language, cultural, psychological, spiritually, and the melodic associations of the Quranic word. Above all, it is the word of Allah revealed to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This leads us to say that since it is unique in its style, it must have been produced by one who challenges not only translators but also Arab scholars to produce a verse or chapter of its quality. It is Allah, the all-knowing, who produced the Quranic language. The above translators seems to have failed replicate the complex web of stylistic features found in the Quranic text. They also failed in their quest for equivalence or communicative effectiveness. They violated the loyalty to the source text principle for the sake of producing a text that works in receptor genre terms. Therefore, my recommendation, or our recommendation together, it is not, when reading an English version of the Quran, it is recommended to remember that it is not an equivalent translation to the Arabic textual version at all. It may be a rough interpretation or paraphrasing of the general meaning of the Arabic text, but definitely not the exact equivalent of the original text. When you are not sure about any conceptual point, ask those who know about it. Any translation of the Quran should presuppose its importance for the community of faith, for those who hold the canonical treatment of the text as authoritative for faith and practice. The version authorized by King Fahd, Quranic printing complex Ali translation dated 14110, seems to be the most appropriate amongst the above 5 translations of the meanings interpretation of the Quran. Now, I'm not asking you to translate any of the meanings of the Quran into English, but I thought I would give you a little exercise so that what you have learned from this lecture you can apply to Hadith Rasulullah sallam. Translate the following hadith into English. Use your creative ability in your translation. And again, the same. Translate the following hadith into English. Use your creative translation in your creative ability in your translation. عن أنس عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. Now, this is very a brief discussion about the seriousness of translating a sacred text, let alone the meanings or the interpretation of the Quran. I hope you have learned something today from this lecture, and I wish you all the best. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.